Alright guys, so I told you I was going to be making this video here, comparing 3 different video monitors with 3 different tube types. So here we're going to be going into this ultimate, not really comparison, between a slot mask, a dot mask, and an Aperture Grille video monitor. So I can't wait to show you guys the results and how everything looks like. Alright, so how's it going everyone? My name is P017 or PO17, whichever you prefer to call me. And this is a video I've been wanting to make for a while now on all of these beautiful CRT video monitors. So, as I mentioned in the intro, this is of course going to be a comparison between 3 different tube types, between 3 different video monitors. So there's going to be a few different ways I'm going to be comparing these. I'm going to try to keep everything as even as possible, and I'll go over the rules in a little bit. But we'll go ahead and start off with looking at each video monitor that we're going to be looking at. So let's go ahead and start off here on the right side. This here is my trusty Elmo ECM14L1 video monitor. This is a slot mask tube with 420 TV lines of resolution. So this is technically the lowest out of all 3 in terms of its TV line count. However, don't discount that because honestly, it can look really, really nice if you have a lower TV line count. Not too low, but usually my sweet spot would be right around 450. So like I said, don't count that out. It's really, really nice. It's an absolutely wonderful video monitor made for CCTV and security applications. The only downside I would say with this one is the audio is really bad. But it has composite and S-video, and it looks super duper sharp. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one here. So this is my Sony PVM14L1 that I literally got yesterday. I went ahead and calibrated it to its fullest and made it look absolutely beautiful. This is going to, of course, represent our Aperture Grille TV or video monitor type, tube type, with 600 TV lines of resolution and a 0.25 millimeter pitch. So this overall is a really nice little Trinitron. It is more of a budget Trinitron video monitor as it only contains composite and S-video. Still has a lot of nice adjustments, and overall it is a really nice little set for being a 14-inch tube. And of course, last but not least, we're going to be looking down here. This is my dot mask video monitor. It is a Panasonic WVCM1480. Like I mentioned, is a dot mask with 750 TV lines of resolution, and it does not have any sort of pitch that I can find in terms of its specifications. So as you can see, this is the highest TV line count. But overall, all these ones we're going to be comparing in S-video today, and it's going to be pretty fun. This one also has only composite and S-video, funny enough, so every single one of them will be running that, which is really nice because it makes everything pretty even overall. In terms of the TV line count too, I'll just go over that a little bit. Typically speaking, I see slot masks anywhere between 350 to 450 with a video monitor, sometimes a little less. For Aperture Grilles, anywhere between 450 to 600 usually is a pretty good average. And down here for dot masks, usually 550 to 750 is what I see. So this is all relatively within reason of each other. So I mean, it's not, of course, even. Ideally, I'd want to get every single little thing even in terms of comparisons, but can't really get that, especially considering the fact that all of them are made by different brands, have different tubes in them. These two use Changhua tubes, funny enough, and that, of course, it's a Sony. So we'll go ahead and getting into everything here in just a moment. Also, we're going to be running all 3 of these on 240p and 480i. So I'm going to be pulling up 240p test suite first, then going to my 240p game, and then my 480i game. Now, without further ado, let's go ahead and plug in the Elmo. So that's our starting contender. Alright, so starting off with our Elmo ECM1480X on 240p test suite using my Super Nintendo through S-video, of course. So this is a really, really nice looking tube for being 420 TV lines as a slot mask video monitor. We'll go ahead and go into here too, take a look at the grid pattern, just to show you how everything is in terms of its geometry convergence. And we're also going to be looking close at the screen to check out how the sharpness of the image looks. So as you can see here, geometry and convergence, super, super nice. This is probably one of my best converged sets I've ever owned, and I've not even had to touch the convergence rings or adjust anything whatsoever. So that's really awesome. In terms of its horizontal and vertical, we're going to be also looking at horizontal and vertical scrolling on a 2D setting, just to get a feel for how it looks. Also wanted to mention too, all these tubes I have made videos on in the past, so I will be linking, of course, in the description, every single one of those videos. And another thing we're going to be looking at too, in terms of all these, is just going to be how, I guess you can say, every single game looks, 240p 480i. We're going to be looking at stuff like the interlacing effect, how bad it is or how good it is, how well it can blend a picture, everything like that. So, let's go ahead and take a look up even closer here at the picture. So like I said, the grid pattern shows it really well. This is how sharp a slot mask tube is, specifically this one. Now, as you can see here, there is not very big scan lines, however, it is still pretty noticeable across the board. And of course, as we get to the corner too, funny enough, this one does not have that much focus loss either towards the corners, which is really, really nice. Overall, a very nice and solid picture. Scan lines are pretty minimal, and that is typical for a slot mask, I guess, tube. So usually you see these on consumer sets, just because that is what they most all the time had. And if it was a Sony, well, it had an Aperture grill. If it's a Trinitron. But yeah, so that's really nice. The scan lines on these are very jagged for slot mask tubes. So that's an interesting sort of key thing to look at, is they are not very uniform in terms of the scan lines. But when it does end up benefiting in terms of that look, is it actually will tend to blend 480i really, really well. And like I said, we'll be looking at that here in a little bit. So of course, next up, what we're going to be looking at is we're going to be looking at some video tests here. So the first one's going to be our scroll test here. So this is how it looks like going horizontally. I'll even speed it up a little bit. So in terms of its screen rolling here, it is surprisingly really good. There is not very much barrel rolling, anything like that you might see on the edges over here, and it just looks fantastic in terms of how it is. Now let's go ahead and go to, let's see if I can actually find it. I might be able to get it here. There we go. Vertical scroll test. I knew it was here somewhere. And let's see, my camera is not really liking this. But as you can see here, the vertical scroll test, it does pretty well in as well. There's not very much stretching or compressing going on until you get towards the edges up here and down here. But that is actually pretty common for a lot of CRTs to do stuff like that. And yeah, also you might see my screen video is rolling a little bit here in terms of its picture. For some reason, my phone has never liked filming this Elmo video monitor, but that's okay. Anyways, so in terms of its video, it looks really, really good. Let's go ahead and move on, of course, to our 240p game. Alright, so I have chosen The Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past, and I really wish this had a better video right now. I do not know why it did that. Well, like I said, it doesn't really like to play nice with this tube for very long. So, we're going to go ahead and just look at the image quality here while we're at it. So, right now, this is Link in his nice little house, and we're going to go ahead and get a close-up of this. So like I said, this is still S video. This is what I'm talking about in terms of the scan line. So it's very, very minimal. It's slightly jagged, but it makes everything come together and blend really nicely. So if you're not looking for something that has a bunch of scan line gap to it, this is actually really, really good for that. So overall, the image detail is still super nice, as you can see here. You can see all the squared off edges really, really well. And overall, it is just an absolutely marvelous picture. Like I said, only 420 TV lines, but that still is plenty enough for a 14-inch video monitor in terms of how it looks. And we're going to go ahead and go outside as well on this and see how outside looks like. Alright, there we go. So, this is how the outside looks like. Still a really nice picture overall. Like I said, scrolling too, really, really good. It doesn't have too much going for it, and that's partially due to the fact that it's also a curved TV. Typically speaking, flat CRTs have problems with scrolling, especially horizontally. But yeah, overall, this is a really, really nice looking set. So 240p wise, it looks absolutely wonderful. I'll go ahead and get another view of Link right here outside and how it looks. So, yep. Overall, a fantastic looking set. Like I said, it's very great for if you want 240p, but to not have a very gapped image in terms of scan lines. Overall, it is surprisingly very good. But let's go ahead and move on to a 480i game now. Alright, and here we have F-Zero GX as our 480i game of choice. Like I said too, I'm going to be using the same game with every single monitor here. So this is the first one we're going to be looking at. As you can see, it's a very, very clear image as well. Looks super, super nice, and just from looking at it at my distance behind the video camera, which is about 4 feet away, I cannot see any sort of interlacing effect whatsoever at 480i. And like I said, that's the benefit of not having very big scan lines at all. It makes 480i games look super, super nice because you don't get to have that interlacing, flickering effect going on, and it just looks fantastic for this set. So I'll go ahead and get a closer-up image of this as well, just so you can see. And when I get closer, you might be able to see a little bit of interlacing here, but you're not going to be standing like an inch or two away from the screen. So, I mean, unless you really want to, but that's up to you. But yeah, overall, this image looks absolutely fantastic for how it looks on 240p and 480i. You can't complain about this. But aside from that, though, this is what we're going to be looking at for the Elmo ECM1480X. This is, of course, contender number 1. We still have 2 more to look at, so let's go ahead and move on to our next contender. Alright, so our next contestant is going to be my Sony PVM14L1, and you're not going to be able to see it too well because, of course, everything but the video screen is dark, but this is going to be our Aperture Grille set. Right off the bat, this definitely looks quite a bit different. Its 600 TV line tube definitely looks a little bit sharper in my opinion in terms of how everything looks. So you can't really see any of the phosphors on the screen as much as you could with the Elmo ECM1403X. However, one thing to note is you can definitely see the scan line gap a lot more on this set. Now, Aperture Grilles are known to typically have a bigger scan line gap than slot mask televisions or video monitors whatsoever. And that gives them the benefit of usually looking a bit sharper and nicer overall. Typically speaking, a lot of people like Sony Trinitrons and how they look because they will typically give a more blocky image, and it's a little bit more pixely, you can say, the sharper you get, more so than any other mask. Also, the scan line gap, and I'll show you here in a little bit, looks very uniform and very straight. So you don't get that jagged look like the slot mask tubes as you would. So we'll go ahead and look at grid right here. I was just showing monoscope here earlier. We'll go ahead and zoom in here in terms of its look. Geometry and convergence, like I mentioned, I had just calibrated this yesterday, so it looks perfect. But as we get in really close, you can see what I mean by the look of the tube. So it is super sharp. And in fact, it's kind of funny because my camera, this one's actually some of the hardest to focus on. This is very dense in terms of its phosphors and how it looks, but it looks very, very smooth and sharp overall. In terms of convergence, typically speaking, I have actually had the worst experiences with convergence on Sony sets. I don't know why I have had that. This one is not super bad. There is a tiny, tiny bit here and here, but it's really not noticeable if you're standing back a few feet. So overall, it is a really nicely well put together set. This 14L1 is. And there's a moth on the screen now. Go ahead and get that off. Alright, so I went ahead and moved on to the scroll test here. And just because we've already looked at the grid pattern and everything, and one thing I will note, so typically speaking, Sony Trinitrons, especially curved ones, will have the best horizontal scrolling I have ever seen compared to other video monitors and TVs. So the scrolling here is extremely uniform. There's basically no stretching whatsoever, going from right to left or left to right, and it looks absolutely wonderful. Now we'll go ahead and see if we can go to the vertical scrolling here. So vertical scrolling is about the same as the Elmo ECM1403X. There is hardly any compression or stretching until you get to the edges, but like I said, that is quite normal for any CRT that you'd come across. So this looks really, really nice overall. And yeah, so one thing I will mention though, so in terms of the image on this set, I don't know, you can't really see it, but personally to me, compared to the Elmo video monitor, this one does have a tiny, tiny, tiny little bit of blur to it. And I have focused up this image, so this is basically as sharp as it'll go. However, I have noticed other Sony Trinitrons looking like that. They'll either look super duper sharp, especially if they have a lower TV line count, or they tend to look a little blurry if you get a little higher in terms of its TV line count. Whether or not that's up to you in terms of preference, but overall, it's just kind of something to note. And I think part of the reason for that is how it deals with edges. So like I said, it is very blocky in terms of how its edges are. However, it is still pretty soft, which is pretty interesting to note. Like I said, and this also mentioning on this too, the sharpness on this display is pretty normal for how it is, so it's nothing to do with that or whatnot. Overall, though, it still looks really good. But anyways, let's go ahead and move on to a 240p game, which is, of course, The Legend of Zelda. Oh. Well, it didn't do the absolute best job here either, and it's also turning blue on this. So, well, I guess that's just how my phone is. Doesn't do too well with that. But one thing I will say, like I mentioned earlier on the 240p test suite, it is very much apparent that the scanline gap is a lot more noticeable on the set. And overall, the image quality, I would say, definitely looks a little bit sharper than the Elmo. One thing to note, like I said, because of how tiny the phosphors are on this display as opposed to on the Elmo, you see, I guess, a bit more detail in general. The whites, you don't really see the red, blue, and green. And of course, the very uniform scan lines make it all look pretty nice. Like I said, there's still that tiny, tiny bit of blur on the image. And another thing I want to note too, for those who might be curious, I am running a Super Nintendo 1 chipset, so it's about as good as you can get. But yeah, overall, it's still really nice for how it looks. S-Video still looks very clean on this set. Like I said, it's not RGB or anything like that, but overall it is still very pretty. So as we look at Link here, like I said, you can see the scanline gap quite a bit more as opposed to the other one. But overall, still a very nice image, very blocky in terms of the edges over there, just a little bit soft. Now, I have owned a couple other Sony PVMs before, including I also have a Sony GVM, funny enough, which has the same line count as this. And they, for the most part, all look about the same. The only one that didn't was my PVM1490, and that had a 450 line TV resolution tube, and that was the best Aperture Grille picture I've ever seen, like ever, in terms of Sony. So I like, typically speaking, a little bit of a lower line count instead of a higher one. It also just makes these scan lines look a little bit more, I wouldn't say bigger or smaller or more dense or less dense, or I guess bigger gapped or whatever, but it just gives it a more unique feel in terms of how everything is edged off. But yeah, overall, still really beautiful set. Like I said, still a little bit soft in terms of the image along the edges overall, but I still like this quite a lot. And you should too. This is a very good video monitor for its time. 2005, I mean, it was really nice. Sony was making some really good video monitors back in the day. But overall, this is plenty good to play on for 240p, as you can see. But let's go ahead and take a look at 480i. Well, actually, go ahead and take a look after I kill this guy. There we go. Nice and dead. And actually, we'll go ahead and zoom in here before as well. So you can see here, this is how the scan lines are, the grass, the flowers, that enemy over there that's just running around doing absolutely nothing. Well, he might actually do something pretty soon. But yeah, it's a very nice looking picture. Well, let's go ahead and move on to F-Zero now, shall we? Alright, now we got F-Zero GX loaded up. Right off the bat on the intro, so I did notice the interlacing effect is quite a bit more noticeable on this set over previous ones. And in fact, actually, let me go ahead and see if I can. Let's see here. Turn down the volume just a little bit, just because it is a little bit loud. There we go, a little bit better. But yeah, like I said, the interlacing effect is a little bit more noticeable, but because this is a 14-inch set, it's still going to be pretty small and not that bad. From where I'm standing, which is the exact same length as I was standing for the Elmo ECM14L1, it is definitely slightly more noticeable. In terms of moving pictures and everything like that, it is a lot less noticeable, but let's go ahead and enter. See right here, on a still image for 480i, you can definitely see it a little bit more. So you definitely want to stand back just a little bit if the flickering bothers you. If it doesn't, it's plenty fine. But yeah, overall, so this one does a little bit better, I'd say, at 240p. It actually is more of a preference thing, honestly, and how you want everything to look. If you want bigger scan lines, smaller ones, all that sort. 480i, it does suffer a little bit, but it still does produce a fairly detailed image. And like I said, too, this is still a little bit softer as well, but overall, it is still very nice for being a Sony PVM Aperture grill. Now let's go ahead and move on to our last contestant. Alright, we're on our last contestant, or contender. I don't know if I keep switching up the names or not. But this is my Panasonic WVCM1480. So this is my dot mask video monitor, 750 TV lines. And right off the bat, this also has quite a big scan line gap, just the same as the Sony PVM14L1. In fact, just about the same amount of gap, funny enough. And this also has a little bit more sharpened out edges. So it looks a little bit sharper overall compared to the slightly softer image that the PVM produced. Now that, of course, could be a little bit of a difference between the fact that this is 750 TV lines and the other 600. So this one can potentially resolve more detail in terms of everything like that. However, one thing that's pretty neat to note is for dot mask video monitors, and in general, like you see it in PC monitors too, because, of course, the screen is made up of a bunch of little dots instead of stripes, typically speaking, your edges will actually be rounded out a little bit more, as opposed to very blocky. Now, if you have it super duper sharp, it'll, of course, still be looking pretty blocky, but if you look really closely, you'll actually see a little bit more rounded out edges, which is really, really nice. I like that. But anyways, let's go ahead and go to the grid pattern here. So, typically speaking, my personal favorite video monitors or PC monitors or whatever to converge in terms of CRTs are dot mask video monitors. They typically will have the absolute best convergence, period. I have not had a single issue with convergence on any sort of dot mask set, apart from a couple cheap PC monitors, but it's really not that bad because almost every PC monitor has really good convergence. But enough of that. So in terms of its geometry, convergence, everything is very uniform. It looks very good. We'll go ahead and zoom in here, of course, on the display, and you'll get to see how the phosphors look like. So as you can see right here, these are the absolutely tiny little dots that make up the whole display. And like I said, this is very sharp, so you do get a bit of scan line gap, and it's very noticeable across the entire image. But yeah, these itty-bitty little dots are really, really cool. They make up the display. Also, I did forget to mention something. So in terms of the brightness on every single one of these, all these video monitors were quite bright, in fact. All of them were fairly well taken care of for the most part, and overall they are all really good. However, it is important to note that typically speaking, Aperture grills will have more brightness than any other tube in terms of its mask type. Typically speaking, slot masks are about the second best, and dot masks are about the dimmest. However, this one is actually quite bright for it being what it is. However, this is also a really well taken care of set that I had a very good, I guess you can say, I don't really know. All I know is that I have the chance to basically own one of these, and it was really nice that I did. So, in terms of everything, it looks really, really good. We'll go ahead and, of course, go to the video test here. We'll go ahead and look at the scroll test. So scroll test-wise, the image overall is very, very nice. Horizontal scrolling is not too bad. I do see a tiny, tiny bit of stretching over on each side here and on here, but it's really not that bad, not that noticeable, especially in game whenever you're more focused on the middle of the screen. In terms of vertical scrolling, this is a little bit more stretching in terms of the upper and lower corners as well, so not as good as the other two. However, that is also dependent on the type of set you get. They can also vary in terms of stretching or not, and of course there are some sets where you can actually adjust that out a bit more, depending on if you have linearity, anything like that, which will help with that. So overall, it's not the best, but honestly, it's more dependent on the set than it is this being a dot mask display. Honestly, the only difference the mask really makes is just how the image quality looks like. And this one looks absolutely exceptional on S-Video. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and move over to Zelda. One thing I did want to mention, by the way, so I did notice it on video just now, that whole red tint that you might have just seen there, that's not part of the display. That's just a thing that my camera does. So don't worry about that too much. But anyways, we'll go ahead and move on to taking a look at how the screen looks here. So we'll go ahead and start out in, of course, Link's home, like we've seen the past couple times. And if this video monitor will get it right, it will show how it actually looks like. There we go. A little bit better. So, just from looking at the display, like I mentioned earlier, it's quite a bit sharper in terms of the edges and everything like that, but the scan lines compared to the PVM look about the same. So, readability, everything like that still looks about the same, just with a bit more of a sharper edge in terms of everything around here. The hearts, the numbers, the borders here, it all looks just a little bit more sharp, and so you don't have that much softness compared to the other sets. Now, in terms of compared to the Elmo, this one's quite a lot sharper compared to the Elmo because it can resolve more detail with its higher, more finely pitched tube. Even though I don't know the pitch, I'm pretty sure it's a lot less than the Elmo's. But overall, still really, really nice. Let's go ahead and take a look closely here at the image. So as you can see here, itty-bitty little dots making up the display. I love little dot mask video monitors. They always look really good. Unfortunately, my camera does not like to get a good image with that. So overall, still really nice here. Looks really good. Like I said, all the edges look really nice. Like they're also a little bit more rounded off. I do apologize for the scrolling there not doing too well. But overall, it is just absolutely beautiful in terms of how it looks like. And like I mentioned, this is on S-Video because this set did not come with RGB. Pretty sure you can mod it in, but I don't care for that so much. But anyways, let's go ahead and walk outside, take a look at the surrounding area, and then we'll move on to 480p. Or not 480p, 480i. My bad. There we go. So overall, like I said, still looks very beautiful. If I can get this video to look good. There we go. Man, I haven't played on this actually in a little while. Funny enough, I used this set a lot to play my VCRs on, just because I wanted to. And there you go. So that's how this looks like, pretty good. Like I said, I do apologize for the occasional scrolling there that's blue. That's not the video monitor itself, that's just the camera and how it looks, and how it doesn't like to sync up properly to the display. But that's okay. So overall, still really nice. This is how it looks. I'm going to go ahead and get in closer as well, just to show you again the outside. How this looks. It looks very, very nice, very sharp. Flowers look really good. The gate looks pretty nice. Overall, just a nice little set. And like I said, I love dot masks a lot. Typically speaking, I actually like the slightly less TV line count ones with a higher dot pitch. So for example, I had a Panasonic BT-M1310Y. That one had a much higher dot pitch than this, or my JVC that I used to have as well. This one's probably like 0.25 or so. but the other had a 0.39 dot pitch with a lower 550 TV line tube, and it looked awesome. But anyways, enough of that. We'll go ahead and move on to 480i. Alright, so for FZ GX here, overall the picture actually looks pretty dang good. I did, like I said, notice the interlacing a little bit more than the Elmos, and a tiny bit less than the Sony's. So I would say this is between the two in terms of interlacing flicker effect. Overall, you're not going to see it during moving images like this and whatnot, but I'll go ahead and snap to the title screen and you'll get to see more of how that looks. But overall, there we go. So it still looks pretty good. Like I said, it is a bit noticeable in the title screen, more so than, of course, the Elmo, and slightly less so than the Sony. But for being 750 TV line, this is still extremely detailed of an image. In fact, I'll even get close for this as well, so you can kind of see what I mean. But overall, really beautiful. I absolutely love this set here, and in fact, I love my other two just as much. All of them have a different look to them, and all of them look awesome. It's just a matter of preference, really, in terms of what you want. But anyways, that's pretty much going to be it. So we'll go ahead and go over the three and kind of my final thoughts. Alright guys, so that has been my comparison between all three video monitors, and this has been quite a long video to make. It is a surprisingly long video in general, so I hope you guys have a good time watching through it all the different details, everything like that. In terms of my final thoughts, how I would rate them, personally, I don't know exactly how I would rate them, because every single one of them looks different to a point where actually they're all unique in their own way. Between these two, considering these two are probably the most similar, I actually prefer the Panasonic better. I just like dot mask video monitors way more. And typically speaking, like I said, I've worked with Sonys before, and a lot of them do have a tiny bit of blur, which I'm not personally preferenced to in terms of that. I've seen some really sharp Trinitrons though, and like I said, they look pretty good. I have my GVM right over there that I absolutely love and adore to death. But compared to all these three, I would say Panasonic is still one of my favorites. Elmo is also one of my favorites, not just because it was one of my first video monitors, just because a slot mask tube for a video monitor will still look absolutely amazing, even if it is just used for CCTV/security purposes. Still absolutely great. And of course, can't discount the Sony Trinitron. These are very well-known PVMs in the professional market. They were used quite a lot for broadcasting, CCTV, just any sort of professional applications, medical, anything like that, you name it. So Sony can really nail a picture whenever they need to, absolutely. In terms of every other feature, like I mentioned, that has the smallest scan line gap, but that's kind of to be expected considering the TV line count. These two have about the same scan line gap overall, which is a bit bigger, more noticeable on a smaller set. So if you want something with a little bit less gap and more 480i blending, I highly recommend looking for a slot mask video monitor. I have owned quite a few different versions of them, some with 320 TV line tubes, some with 420 TV line tubes, funny enough. And they look absolutely wonderful for 480i, almost better than every single one of these. Bar one exception, funny enough. For a super high-res picture, dot mask video monitors are absolutely amazing. I have owned quite a few of these, like I mentioned earlier, and quite a few of these Sony Trinitrons as well. These have given me just the most sharpest, most detailed, most beautiful display, and they don't sacrifice in terms of the sharpness. So a lot of times when people are looking at video monitors, some people want the sharpest that it can possibly go to look like stupidly clean and everything like that. But personally, I don't really like that, because then you're taking away from what CRT TVs, video monitors, any tube sort of set really goes for, which is how well it can blend an image and make it look super, super nice in terms of that. But you're trying to balance that between detail and the blending effect that these initially, or just in general, have, inherently have, I guess I should say. So that's why I like dot mask video monitors. And also, the best one I've ever seen for 480i was a dot mask. It was my Panasonic BTM1310Y. It looked basically as good as 480p. So look for one of these if you want something super sharp. Panasonic, JVC, Ikegami. There's a Hitachi rebrand of, funny enough, a Panasonic one and a JVC one. They're all the same. They all make dot mask video monitors, so that's really cool. And I guess for swap masks too, the ones I've typically seen, on Panasonic, Elmo, even though you're not going to be able to find Elmo, you will find Pelco video monitors, though. Typically those have Samsung tubes. And of course JVCs as well. Some of the well-respected ones will have swap mask tubes. Like I said, Panasonic also. It's funny, I thought one of the 19-inch sets that they had was a dot mask, but it turns out it's not. It's a slot, which is really neat. And of course, Sony Trinitrons here, the Aperture Grille. It's still really nice overall. If you just want a nice clean image with a more blocky edge, this is what you'd go for. This will give you, especially a sharper Sony, will give you a much more pixelated look than any other set. And in fact, even a low-res one will as well. Like, I've owned a PVM14L1, which is only 250 TV lines. But it looks super pixely, really, I guess you could say squared off, which is pretty neat. So if you kind of wanted that look more, a Sony Trinitron would be better for that. But overall, it is not as preferable to me, I would say, just because, typically speaking, whenever you get really sharp with these Trinitrons, it tends... Each scan line that's drawn tends to just look like a blurred line that just goes across the screen. I have that problem with this Sony GVM. However, if you get a lower pitched or a lower TV line count Trinitron, like my PVM14L1 or my PVM1390 that I used to have, it will produce probably one of the best images you'll ever see. The PVM1390 is no joke, guys. That thing produced an absolutely amazing image. You should watch that video that I made on it. It is just awesome for how an Aperture Grille looks like. So, anyways, I've gone over this long enough. So, like I said, in terms of my thoughts, personally, I prefer my Panasonic over all three of them at the most. Then my Elmo, then my Trinitron PVM14L1. Most people are probably going to say the PVM14L1 would be their choice just because Sony's made a crap load of PVMs and they are all over the place and they're really nice, but it's up for you to decide how it looks. But every single one of them did really great, and they all look fantastic. So if you can grab one, grab any of them. That's what I would say. But thank you very much, guys, for watching this ultimate, not really, comparison video of every single one of these displays and how they look. And I hope you guys are more well-informed in terms of what you like, what you want, and what to now look for. So thank you guys again very much. If you want to see more videos like this, me comparing more displays, go ahead and leave comments. Subscribe if you want to. Give me a thumbs up. Anything like that. And I will see you all in the next video.